Webinar Benchmarks Report 2018. My name is Salma Avdic from the American Marketing Association, and I will be your moderator today. So before we get started, I do want to cover some important housekeeping items. So the console that you're currently looking at can be customized in a number of ways. So you have the option to move and resize any windows that you have open. You will also see a toolbar at the bottom of your screen where there are a number of widgets that you can explore. I will quickly review them from left to right. So we have the media player, which controls the volume of your webcast. Next to that is a slide area widget, which opens and closes your slide window. Following that is a speaker bio if you want to learn more about our awesome presenter. And then we have a Q&A widget. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. You can click on this widget to submit your questions, comments, feedback throughout the presentation. Twitter widget, if you want to continue the conversation and tweet about this event, it's hashtag ON24 webinar. Resources widget, where you have the option to download slides from this presentation along with any other complementary resources. And then the help widget if you have any technical problems. Lastly, you will receive an email notification when this webinar will be available on demand, so stay tuned for that. And with that, I'm excited to introduce and welcome our speaker, Mark Bornstein, who's the Vice President of Content Marketing at ON24. And I do want to tell you a little bit about Mark. I'm sure you already know. He's one of my favorites, but I will share some notes about him before I turn it over. So in his role, he is the Chief Evangelist and Marketing Strategist in support of ON24's webinar marketing platform. Mark brings over 20 years of content marketing, corporate communications, and account management experience at leading companies. These include Cisco, GE Access, and Compatible Systems. Mark has presented at many of today's biggest marketing conferences, and for the past 6 years, he has been the host of the ON24 Webinar Best Practices Series webcast, which has thousands of followers across the globe. So with that, I will turn it over to him now to get us started.
All right, Salma, thank you. What an introduction. Wow. Well, it is so great to be back with our friends at American Marketing Association, and Salma, always so fun to do this with you. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to be talking to all of you today. We're going to be reviewing the results of the 2018 Webinar Benchmarks Report. For those of you that are not aware of this, we've been doing this benchmarks report for, oh my gosh, now like 7 years. This is the de facto report on webinar marketing. There's just a ton of really great statistics in here about webinar marketing. It goes through the entire life cycle of webinars, so you'll get a lot of really great statistics. I will also try to fill in some of the color around some of the statistics as well. So this is one of those sessions where hopefully you'll get a lot of really practical guidance on your marketing and your webinar marketing in general. I think you'll get a lot out of it. Okay, before we get started and start reviewing the actual benchmarks, let's talk just for a second why you're here. So why are these benchmarks important? Why, well, what's going on with webinar marketing today? Look, webinars are not the newest marketing technology. It's not the latest buzzword or anything like that. And as marketers, we do love us some buzzwords, but webinars have really changed profoundly over the last few years. And the role that webinars are playing for marketers today has changed a lot. And a lot of that is because of what's going on with our buyers. The modern buyer today, as has been discussed ad nauseum in marketing conferences around the world, I know all of you are sort of familiar with this whole idea of the modern buyer, the self-educated buyer. Who is this mystical unicorn, this person that basically doesn't want to talk to your salesperson anymore? They're going to educate themselves. They're going to make their own buy decision. And the way that we are sort of dealing with that is that we are surrounding them with lots of different types of content and lots of different channels for marketing, right? So we've got our blogs and our websites and our SEO strategies, and we've got forums and email marketing strategies and physical events and all kinds of different things that we sort of put out there like breadcrumbs to try to get them to engage with us. The problem is so much of our marketing today is becoming what I like to call sort of static digital marketing. We're hoping to entice people to see our infographic or to download our white paper or download our research report or watch our video or maybe engage with us socially. But these are largely static experiences. People can, what happens when somebody downloads your white paper? Did they read it? Did they read some of it, all of it? If it was an ebook, maybe you can tell. Did they have thoughts? Did they have questions? You have no way of knowing, right? So we're really not doing a good job of qualifying prospects, even when we get a marketing touch, because they're just sort of downloading content or experiencing digital content in a very static manner. At some point, we need to figure out new ways to engage, to actually interact and engage with our prospects. So I ask you, what is the way in which you are engaging with the human being, the person at the other end of your marketing? Whether you're using sophisticated technologies like artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, machine learning, or maybe you're just doing basic email marketing and you're relying on your blogs and your social media and your content strategies. At some point, we need to have a moment of persuasion. Relationship-based marketing has sort of gone away because we've lost that ability to talk to people, especially as we pull salespeople out of that process. So what replaces that experience? Well, what's old is sort of new again, because all of a sudden webinars have become that answer to that problem. What other technology do you have where you are literally in front of your prospects or customers for up to an hour at a time, right? Listen, you guys are all right here with me now for an hour. Hopefully you'll stay for the whole hour. I think you will. And it's an opportunity for us to engage. It's an opportunity for me to present content to you, but it's so much more than that. And I'll talk about that in a moment. When you think of webinars, the one thing I want you to, you'll see the benchmarks, but I want to go beyond the benchmarks for a second. When you think of a webinar in your mind, maybe you're thinking of your own webinars, maybe you're thinking of webinars that you've attended. A lot of you are thinking a talking PowerPoint presentation. Now, I know some of you are going, wait a minute, Mark, isn't that what you're doing right now? But webinars have really evolved, and the modern webinar, what I like to call the engagement-driven webinar, is so much more. And what we're seeing is companies moving to a completely new model of webinars. Webinars are becoming more like daytime talk shows than they are like the talking PowerPoints you're familiar with. They're increasingly much more interactive. Yes, we're going to do Q&A at the end of today's presentation. By the way, as you see me delivering all these benchmarks, when you have questions, just get them in as many questions as you can, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. But there's so much more we can do. Unfortunately, I got to go through a lot of data for you on this webinar, so we normally do a bunch of polls, but I was worried we weren't going to have time, so I pulled the polls out. But we could be doing polls. We could have a chat box where you can talk to each other. There's so many different ways in which you can interact with your audience, and I'll show you some benchmarks on how people are doing that. Webinars are increasingly becoming multimedia experiences. We see video being used in a myriad of ways, not just studio video, lots of different types of video. I'll talk about that as well. Webinars are also becoming multi-touch content experiences. It's not just the presentation that your prospects are experiencing. A really, really great modern engagement-driven webinar is an experience where somebody's, yes, they're viewing your presentation, but they're also downloading content. Maybe you're linking them to a free trial. You're linking them to other key conversions forms that you have, or CTAs. Maybe you've got URL links to web pages or campaign landing pages. Maybe you're driving people to a demo. Maybe you're bringing people to a registration form for a live event or a roadshow tour that you have coming up, or other future content assets. Maybe you're sending them to YouTube pages to see more content. It could be anything. But what we see is the webinar becoming this sort of cloud of content. It's the presentation, but it's so much more. And then finally, and this is really, I think, the big difference maker, is webinars are really one of the only tools we have left now to have a real human experience, to deliver a real human experience for our prospects. It's people talking to people. Right, and that makes a big difference. I feel like I'm sitting across the table from you, and we're having a conversation. Yeah, just you, nobody else, right? and all the engagement and the interactivity makes that work. And we'll look at some benchmarks around all of that. It is for this reason. It is because of all of that. It is because of what the modern webinar has become, that you see the role of webinars changing dramatically for marketers today. So this is from Forrester a while ago, but I really love this chart because, look, webinars for the longest time have been the number one way in which companies are generating leads. It used to be things like trade shows or conventions or whatever, or conferences. That's usually not the case as much anymore, although it still can be an effective tool. But webinars are easy. They're easy to create. They're easy to deliver. You can do lots of them. So it's not a surprise that Forrester shows that webinars are the number one channel or tool for us to generate leads. Of course, it's been like that for quite a few years now. What's changed is the rest of the buying cycle. So let's go back to the far left. For driving awareness of your brand and your products, webinars are second only to your website. Think about that. Right? Your website is your primary billboard, but for most companies, they're using webinars to educate people about who they are and what they do and what they sell and what they're all about. And then if you move further right, you see that webinars are second only to sales enablement and telemarketing, essentially sales engagement for nurturing that lead all the way through lead generation, through bottom of the funnel closing deals. Because it's now this is now the way in which we are engaging with people. So webinars are no longer just top of funnel thought leadership content, right? We're taking all of our static content, like a case study, for example. Yeah, we all have those case studies written up, right? You know those, what I'm talking about, those 50 things on your website in your resource center that say, here's the company, here's what they do, here was their challenge, here was here's what how they used our product, and here were the great results they see. Well, companies are now turning those case studies into webinars. What about demos? They're turning their bottom of the funnel demos that were static in the past, maybe a video or an online tutorial. Now they're turning them into live demos that you can run constantly to try to convert. So the role of webinars has really risen across the entire buying cycle. And even as you have a customer, that customer relationship, it's a great way to continue and to continue to upsell and cross-sell and to build loyalty because you're maintaining a relationship with people. Okay, that's a lot of setup. I know. Let's get to the benchmarks. All right. So yes, webinars are wonderful, and they're really they have a new role for marketers today. So a little bit about the benchmarks report. Like I said, we've been doing this for about 7 years now, and this is not one of the, okay, we're all marketers, so we all know what survey data, research reports, benchmark reports. We're all a little skeptical because, let's face it, a lot of us know what this tactic is all about, where you put a little survey monkey thing into the field, and you're lucky if you get 40 responses, and you tabulate those 40 responses, and then you somehow figure that out and put it into some context and deliver it as really outstanding data. This is not one of those. This is real data based on a really large amount of information. So in the 2018 version of the benchmarks report, we looked at just under 20,000 webinars. Yeah, that's right. 20,000 webinars measured over the course of an entire year, from January to December of 2017. And we looked at webinars from all companies, all sizes, everything from some small to medium businesses to giant enterprise corporations. So you've got a really great cross-section. There's over 1,500 companies in this mix, in this report. So you can trust this data. This is not like, oh, we looked at 50 webinars and here's some data. I know you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, okay. So you can really trust the data. The data is strong. The way that I'm going to present the data to you, we broke the benchmarks into 3 sections, really sort of spanning the life cycle of a webinar. So the first section will be pre-webinar benchmarks. This is everything that happens before you go live, which is primarily around how you promote your webinars and how you schedule your webinars. Then we'll look at the actual webinar benchmark data, so what happens during the webinar. And then we've got a third section now, which I think is maybe one of the most interesting sections, which is the on-demand benchmarks. And there is a piece of startling data in here. I think the most head-spinning pieces of data in this report, and we'll get there and we'll talk about that. All right, so let's start at the beginning. So the first thing I want to talk about is the pre-webinar benchmark. Every time we talk to marketers and people that deliver webinars, we ask them what their biggest webinar challenges are. Almost every single time they tell us, oh, it's just driving registration. It's getting people to register and getting people to attend and all that. So we've got a lot of benchmarks around these types of activities, and I wanted to share some of this information with you because I think it's really interesting. The very first set of statistics we looked at, and we look at every year, is the promotional cycle. So when are people actually registering for webinars? And what's really interesting is what we did is we just looked at when are webinar registrations coming in. 7 years ago when we started the report, a majority of webinar registrations would come in usually somewhere between 1 and 2 weeks in advance of the webinar. Companies just would do a couple weeks of promotion and that would be about it. What's happened over the last few years is that we're seeing the runway, the promotional runway for webinars beginning to lengthen dramatically. So now if you look at the far left, 24% of all webinar registrations, and there's like, the number of attendees for these 20,000 webinars is probably near the million or something like that. It's a lot of people. 24% of them registered 15 days or more in advance of the webinar. Think about that. A full quarter of everybody that registered for a webinar in this report registered beyond 15 days in advance of the live event. So for those of you that are feeling a little squeamish about, I don't know, I don't want to promote my event too far in advance, don't feel too afraid of that, because we're seeing people much more willing to sign up for webinars in the same way they would sign up for a seminar or a live event that they need to pre-plan for. It does work. Then, but 8 to 14 days in advance, another 23%. Let's then go to the last two on the right. So a majority of registrations still come in a week before your event. That's not surprising, right? There's something about the immediacy of now. So you see 30% of registrations coming in between 1 and 7 days. Note that the day of, 23% of all registrations happen on the day of. When you're building your cadence of promotions, and a majority of webinar registrations are still coming in through email marketing. So for those of you that ask, I've done a lot of informal polling and surveys of companies that are promoting their webinars. Somewhere between 90 and 95% of all registrations are coming through email promotions, all right? I know social is a thing. We're getting there, but it's not there yet. So A couple of things to remember. When you're going to promote your webinar, the first thing you have to decide is how many emails are you going to drop. A lot of you are typically doing 2 emails, maybe 3 emails. Make sure that no matter how many emails you do, you have a day of drop. That is probably the single most important email that you can deliver. Right? 23%, almost a full quarter of all registrations are coming in on the day of the event. Like I said, there's something about the immediacy of now. And the immediacy of now is people realize, oh, this is happening today? You know what? I've got some time. This seems like an interesting topic. I am going to deliver that webinar. Or I'm going to attend that webinar. And that, that really means a lot. So it's important to have that. The next thing is, when you're beginning to figure out what your cadence is, you want to maybe consider adding another email to it or 2. I know a lot of you the reason you don't promote your webinars with more than 2 or 3 emails is because you're worried about saturating your database. But it's because you're looking at it from a very confined window. Don't be afraid to deliver 4 or 5 emails, but spread it out over the course of a longer period of time. Right? So maybe your cadence is going to be 4 emails over 5 or 6 weeks. Nothing wrong with that. You don't want to spam your audience, obviously, so you don't want to drop more than 1 email a week if you can avoid it, but it is a really great strategy to try to lengthen the runway by which you're promoting your events. Okay? Make sense? Good. So the next piece of data we looked at is, well, what are the best days to drop those promotional emails? So you're probably wondering, well, how did you figure that out? Well, what we did is we just looked at what days are a majority of registrations coming in. They, of course, correspond to when those drops are happening. So it's interesting. Over the last few years, the numbers seem to bounce around between this one zone, which is Tuesday through Thursday. Every year we have a winner, and then every year everybody says, oh, well, everyone's dropping emails on Wednesdays. Let's do ours on Tuesdays, and then Tuesday goes back up. So if you look, Tuesday, 21% of all registrations happened on a Tuesday. 23%, our winner this year, happened on a Wednesday. 22% on Thursday, all within the margin of error, although there really is no margin of error here. So the point is the middle of the week is the best time. It's not a surprise. Monday at 16% is a pretty significant drop-off, a really big drop-off to Friday at 12%, and then a giant drop-off on the weekend. Couple of notes here. If a majority of people in this report are B2B, but there is still a fair amount of B2C in here as well. Some B2C companies, not a lot, but some tend to have a relationship with their prospects and customers on weekends, so maybe you flip these numbers on their head a little bit. I don't think that is the case a majority of the time. So why is it like it is? I don't think I need to explain it, but look, Monday, everybody comes in. What are they trying to do? You're trying to clean out your inbox. You've got 1 million emails over the weekend, and people have a tendency to be a little less patient with emails, and they tend to delete much quicker. And then Friday, everybody just wants to get the heck out of there, right? So the middle of the week is your time. Choose your days. What I always like to tell people is you've got to understand your audience. Is your audience Tuesday people, Wednesday people, Thursday people? You won't know unless you A/B test this. So if you're going to do 4 drops or 3 drops in an email cadence, do 1 each day and try to figure out over time which one's working. You're not going to know by just doing 1 of each and then saying, oh, Tuesday 1, I guess our prospects are Tuesday people. You got to do that a lot. Do it a number of times, but over time you will see trends appear, and that's how you'll dial in what days are right for you. Okay, the next thing we looked at are best days for attendance. So this is what days had, the highest attendance, in terms of a webinar. This will help you figure out when to schedule your events. Not a surprise that the data is not that different from the best days to send your emails. The middle of the week is, of course, the sweet spot. Our winner this week this year is Wednesday at 28%, which is great. You see a tiny drop-off to Thursday at 27%, and then a little more significant drop-off to Tuesday at 24%. Now, let me say again, with a little bit of a grain of salt, that every time we put the benchmarks report out, everybody goes, everyone, majority of the webinars on Wednesdays, we're going to go to Tuesday. I guarantee you next year, Tuesday's probably going to be number one. But your sweet spot is in the middle of the week. What's different here is there's such a significant drop-off to Monday, Friday, and weekend. People really don't want to attend webinars, when they just get to work and when they're signing off. So even more so than the when to drop your emails, when to schedule your events, the middle of the week is crucial. Again, A/B test. Figure out where your audience is. You need to learn their habits. You need to learn when they're free. And by the way, if for some of you, I just talked to somebody recently in the life sciences field, and they're communicating to a certain type of medical practitioner. I'll leave them anonymous. And they were saying, look, our doctors are only available to do things typically on Fridays. That is their day, their office day typically, when they're not doing procedures or not taking appointments or whatever. And so Fridays work perfectly for them. So you do have to understand your audience. And if there are unique situations for your audience, then dial those, then schedule those webinars. There's a couple of ways you're going to find that out. One, you should have hopefully a pretty good understanding of your ideal customer profile, and you know a little bit about them and their habits. But not only that, you have to be able to test these things. So if you have some suspicions, well, do some trial balloons. Try a webinar on a Friday if you think you've got Friday people. If it doesn't work, that's okay. You can always move back to the middle of the week. All right, our next set of statistics is best time to hold a webinar. Of all the statistics in this report, this is the one that almost never changes. And these numbers are a little small. You can stretch out your window, by the way, if you can't see the figures and statistics. You can. One of the wonderful things about the webinar platform is you can stretch and move under the windows that you have open. So the winner for this year and every year, best time to hold your webinar is 11 a.m. Pacific time, which is 11, 12, 1, 2 o'clock on the East Coast. This has always been, the case. It's 23%, which is much higher than the next one lower down, which is 16. Why is that? It's because it's the only time, really, where you avoid the rush hour on the West Coast and lunch on the East Coast. So I can't say enough about this being, you should just always set your webinars for this time. There's one exception to the rule. If you wanted to do at 10 a.m. on the East Coast, on the West Coast, you could do that. That might work as well. But you run a little bit of a risk of losing some of the East Coast folks, or at least they may miss some of your webinar because they'll be at lunch or coming back from lunch. So this is a pretty solid statistic that you can count on. Good stuff? You guys writing stuff down? Do you feel like, oh, wow, this is practical stuff. I'm actually learning things. Those webinars, you know what I'm talking about? You go to those webinars and they tell you these high-level things like, as a marketer, you need to just tell a story. And you're like, oh, right, thank you. Got anything useful for me? See, this is one of those. Anyway, okay. I'm a little salty. Every time I go to these marketing conferences, I hate hearing this high-level stuff. I want somebody to tell me real stuff that I can use. Okay. So we just viewed the pre-webinar benchmarks. So we looked at some best times to promote your event. We looked at when you should drop your emails and schedule your events and what times and stuff like that. Now it's time to go live. And we've got a number of statistics in here to give you some ideas of what your expectations for your webinars should be. And for this part, I really want you to think about, for those of you that are running webinars, I want you to benchmark yourself against these numbers. This is your opportunity to figure out, am I doing this right? And you'll understand what I mean as we go through the figures. Okay, so this is one of the big ones, one of the numbers I always get asked about, and that is the average registrant to attendee conversion. What does that mean? That means of everybody that registered, how many of them actually attended the event? Now, The problem is every year we come up with a high-level number. This year the percentage was 44%. So 44% of everybody that registered attended your event. Now, some of you demand gen folks just fell out of your chairs. It's okay. You have to remember that in this study we've got all kinds of webinars. There's training webinars. There's there's internal presentations and stuff like that. So we broke the numbers out to give everybody a more realistic view for whatever your use case or application is. So for a majority of you, and this is American Marketing Association, so you're probably marketers. For marketing webinars, the average registrant to attendee conversion ratio number was 39%. Now, I still think that's a teeny bit inflated. What I always like to tell marketers is if you were performing anywhere between, say, 30 and 40% conversion rate, you're doing great. You're doing just fine. So if for those of you that are going, oh my God, I only get 31% average conversion ratio, that's okay. I think that's actually pretty darn good. Now, for those of you that are in the 20s, I know I talk to people constantly like, oh, I'm only converting about 22% of my registrants into people who attend my webinars. Then you've got a problem, and there's stuff you need to do about that. Now, for those of you that don't know what your conversion number is, shame on you, marketers. Come on. This is a key statistic you should always look at the end of every webinar. I assume your webinar platform tells you that number immediately. Anyway, but let's just say you're performing in the low 20s. What can you do about this? Let me provide a little color around this. There's really a couple of things I think that can make a big difference. Number one, every time somebody registers for your event, you're going to send them a confirmation email, right? I think all of you do that. If you don't, you absolutely should. When you send them a confirmation email, you should absolutely have a button on that email where people can press a button and place your webinar on their business calendar. Make sense? I sign up for a ton of webinars. I love watching webinars. It's the business I'm in. When I sign up for a webinar and somebody sends me a confirmation page and they don't give me that button, I almost inevitably don't take the time to go find that future date in my calendar and then plug it in as an appointment. I just forget about it. And then what's going to happen? A meeting is inevitably going to get scheduled over that time period, and I'm not going to attend their webinar. So you have to have a calendaring tool on your confirmation email. That's the first thing you can do. The second thing you can do is make sure that you've got a strategic reminder strategy. So for everybody that attends your event, not only do they get your confirmation email, but they should be getting at least 2 reminder emails, maybe one a few days before or a day before, and then one the day of. The day of reminder, lots of people are experimenting with those. It used to be that we all delivered the email reminder first thing in the morning, like we do with all of our email programs. So it's sent at like 5 a.m. and then it's in their inbox when they get in there in the morning. I'm increasingly seeing a lot of companies move to sending that email an hour before the webinar, or in some cases I've actually seen it like 5 minutes going live. Don't forget to jump in, and having some success with that. So experiment with that. You might find that you can make some dramatic changes in your ability to get people to attend your events. Another thing you can do is, if you've got an SDR team or a telemarketing team, depending on the terminology you want to use, maybe you want to have them do some calling, almost like robocalling at night, just leaving messages on their voicemails or a reminder message saying, "Don't forget, got a webinar tomorrow. Really excited to see you there." Thanking them, and that personal touch sometimes can be really nice as well. Maybe you've got reminder letters from active prospects or customers that you want to give to your sales team. You can do that as well. So there's a lot that you can do to get the conversion number up. For some of the other numbers, training was 41% conversion. I'm kind of surprised. I thought that'd be higher. Continuing education, about 36%. Communications or internal communications, much higher. Generally, these numbers are broken out. You put them all together, and the metric goes a lot higher. It's not a surprise that for internal trainings or trainings that are being offered, people are opting in, so they're probably going to show up. Okay, So the next thing that we looked at is the average attendee rate. Now we're looking at the people who actually attend your webinar, and this set of statistics is interesting in a few different ways. There's one thing I like to always bring up about this statistic, which is for a lot of you, okay, some of you may work for very large companies and you always have a bazillion people, registering for your events because you've got a giant brand name, and that's wonderful. But I constantly talk to companies that are small and medium-sized businesses, or even small enterprise companies that feel like, oh, well, you know what? I mean, we're happy if we get a few hundred people, and that's pretty good, right? I want to really, hopefully get you to think a little differently about that. Yes, a majority of webinars have a few hundred people. So between 49% of all webinars had between 100 and 200 people. But if you look at you see between 200 and 300, you see about 20%. 300 and 500, about 16%. Now, you may be thinking, well, these are pretty low numbers, 16%. Then it goes to 10% between 500 and 1,000, 7%, 1,000 and up. But we're talking about 20,000 webinars here. So you're looking at 7% of 20,000 webinars have over 1,000 people. I really want to drive home this point that every single one of you can deliver webinars that are drawing 500 people, 800 people, 1,000 people, 2,000 people. Webinars are one of the great democratizers of marketing. Yeah, you may not have the big brand name to draw people in, but if your content is amazing, if your webinars are fantastic, you can build a giant audience. It doesn't matter. I will tell you that when I started my own webinar series, 6.5 years ago, we started with 200, about 150, 200 people average attendees. Within a year, it was getting a little bigger. Within 2 years, now we're getting into 500. Pretty soon it's getting bigger. And now, literally, we have thousands of people every month. You can do that too. I cannot tell you how many examples I see of companies that have giant audiences for their webinars, and some of them I'd never even heard of the company before. It's all about making sure that you've got really great content, that you're speaking to your right audience with the right message, that maybe you're providing a lot of thought leadership when you're beginning to have conversations with people. Yes, you can create mid-funnel webinars and bottom-funnel webinars and demos and that sort of thing, but the more you can become the trusted advisor, the thought leader in whatever you do, if you're good at that, you will get giant audiences. I guarantee you word will spread. People, especially if you have lots of social sharing and that sort of thing, you can build a significant audience, absolutely. So don't fear. Don't rest on your laurels if you're only getting, if you're getting 200 or 300 people per webinar. I really want to encourage everybody to shoot significantly higher. If you're getting a few hundred, shoot for 500. If you're getting 500, shoot for 1,000. If you're getting 1,000, go for it. Go, see how many thousands you can actually get. I think I topped out at 5,000 once, something like that, in one event. It's just ridiculous numbers. Anyway, so you can do it too. Okay, let's continue on. So the next thing we looked at is the average viewing time. This is one of those areas where it sort of is settled in. When we started the report, maybe 7 years ago, yeah. The average viewing time for a 1-hour webinar was 35 minutes. Which is meaning, essentially people are watching about half your webinar, right? Today, and frankly, it's stabilized for quite a few years now, the average viewing time is almost the entire hour. That is really, really good news. So for those of you that are wondering, should I, we're living in the form of the era of snackable content and short attention spans. Should we not be doing hour-long webinars? The answer is absolutely you should be doing hour-long webinars. It's one of the only opportunities you have where people will stay for a whole hour. I hope you guys are still there with me today. They're both good. I'm not saying don't create short-form webinar content. You should be creating hour-long big thought leadership webinars. Maybe you're creating some 30-minute customer interviews. Maybe you've got some 20-minute demos, or maybe you've got some hour-long demos. Have a mix, but don't be afraid of long-form content. Webinars are one of the few, this is the channel that people have chosen to do long-form content consumption, so don't short yourself. Okay, so why are people staying longer? And here's where we get to the magic. And this is one of those, the next few statistics are, I think, ones that you really need to pay careful attention to. And that is what's going on in the webinar. Why are people staying longer? Is it because we're all, getting so great at becoming webinar presenters? No, that's not it. It's because webinars are becoming more engaging. They're becoming more interactive. I know a lot of you are going, oh, Mark, my webinars are quite interactive. We do Q&A at the end, just like you're doing today, and that's great. Look, 82%, top right, of everybody delivering a webinar, 82% of those 20,000 webinars are doing Q&A in some form or fashion. By the way, little tip here, Q&A at the end is great. You really want to engage your audience? Do Q&A 2 or 3 times throughout your presentation. I'm starting to do this more. Didn't have time to do it today, but sometimes I'll break. Like this would have been a good one to actually do if I wasn't so loquacious today. But after each section, I could have stopped, taken a couple questions, done the next section, stopped, taking a couple questions. It's a great way to get people engaged. But don't stop there, okay? 27% of those almost 30% of those 20,000 webinars are doing polling. I love polls. Great way to get your audience engaged. I always try to do 2 or 3 polls in every webinar. Sorry, we don't have a poll today. Content downloads. 67% of all of these webinars have lots of content for people to download. Don't miss this opportunity to surround your audience with lots of content options. 28% are integrating social media, way too low for my taste. Why? If you've got whatever social channels you're nurturing, if you are using Twitter and LinkedIn groups as your primary social channels, then you should always have a link to your Twitter feed and to your LinkedIn group as a part of your webinar. Why not? You've got a captive audience of 300 or 500 or 1,000 prospects, and you can get them to your social properties. Get them to engage with you socially. Do some live tweeting. If your goal is maybe you're a company that you're using Facebook really effectively, then have everybody friend you from Facebook right from your webinars. It's a great opportunity. So this number I think will go up a lot. 32% of webinars are using surveys, and by the way, surveys are not just a tool for you to help understand whether people liked your webinar. You can do a lot with surveys. You can have a survey question. Would you like to be contacted by by something professional? Those of you that are concerned with GDPR, interesting opportunity, right? You can crowdsource what other topics would you like to hear in future webinars. A great way to get people to come back for more. I really love using surveys strategically. Group chat, only 7%. I think that'll go up. I love when you've got audience members not only communicating with the speaker, but also chatting with each other. I think that's a great way to have a really interactive experience. Okay, the next thing we looked at is webinars that integrate video. Let me define that for you. So video can be many different forms. There are a lot of different ways to do video in a webinar. It can be, yes, big studio, broadcast video. It could also be presenting from a webcam or Skype or FaceTime or something like that. Or it could be just dropping video clips into an audio presentation or some combination thereof. This is one of those areas where I really think we're starting to, the numbers are going to balloon really, really fast. In 2014, only 9% of webinars, think about that, 9% of webinars had video of any kind. They were all audio only. Then, there was a big jump to 16, 17, 18. Now it's at 22%. I think within the next year or two, you're going to probably see close to half of all webinars integrating video, maybe even more than that. I really want to encourage all of you to think about video a little bit more. There's so many ways in which you can do video. It's not just the expensive studio stuff, although you know what? That's becoming pretty affordable. I would be willing to bet in almost every one of your markets, there's a company, a studio somewhere that will, rent out there, that will help you for a couple hours a day, film a really polished, really good-looking webinar. You can do it live, you can do it simu-live, and then broadcast it later. And it's becoming pretty affordable. These studios are desperate for business. They'll help you. Webcams. I love webcams. The great democratizer. Again, you can have lots of different presenters coming in from anywhere, and you can still have video. We've got the Brady Bunch effect these days with webcam presenters. I love that. And then if you're doing audio webinars, you could just drop in a video clip. Those videos, all those great videos you made talking about your products or your company or your services or your customers or whatever, drop them in. Help them tell your story. But this is an area where I really think we're going to see some big change moving forward, so I want to encourage everyone to go there. Make sense? All right. And by the way, this is the global benchmark number. So for any of you that are listening from Europe, well, Europe is actually crushing the U.S. when it comes to video adoption. I think the number for Europe is like 10 percentage points, almost 20 percentage points higher. It's much, much higher. So the rest of the world is getting hip to video much faster than the U.S. is. I don't know why that's happening. We're all a little gun-shy, a little scared about using video, but video technology on webinar platforms today is so stable and so easy to use and so effective. Having a face on the webinar or having some video clips, and I know this is very hypocritical because we're not doing it today. We should have done this anyway, but I think all of you will benefit if you start to adopt video. Okay, so getting to our last section, and we're going to get to your questions. I want to remind everybody, get your questions in now. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. I just have a couple more benchmarks I'm going to show you, and then we'll try to take your questions and go through some of the stuff that we talked about. The last section is on-demand webinar benchmarks, and we didn't always do this, by the way, but it's really become obvious that we have to. So what are we looking at here? Now we're looking at what goes on after the live webinar is over, because the webinar still has a lot of legs. It's still got a long life, and you would be amazed at how much value you can get out of your webinars if you continue to promote them. So here's the most staggering statistic I can show you in this entire benchmarks report. Okay, there it is. And that is, okay, so what we did is we looked at when are people viewing. 60% of every attendee of the 8 gazillion people in this report that viewed a webinar over the course of a year viewed live. Okay, 60%, pretty good number. But 35%, over a third of everybody that viewed a webinar over the course of last year viewed on demand. Think about that. Just let that sink in for a moment. For those of you that have been relying, and let's face it, a lot of us are there, old school marketers, right? Everything has been about a live experience, whether it's a live webinar or whether it is a live seminar presentation. Well, we're moving into the on-demand economy, and like I said in the beginning, we're dealing with the self-educated buyer. The self-educated buyer wants to take in content when they want to take it in, on their own time, on their own devices, from their own place, wherever it is, right? And so content consumption behaviors are changing dramatically. They are changing dramatically. I love listening to podcasts. I love watching webinars. I don't have a lot of time during the day to do it. So when do I watch a lot of them? On the train, on the way to work, or going home. If your event isn't available on demand, I may not see your event unless I watch it live, right? So this is really interesting, and what we're seeing is there's a lot of different ways to deal with it. Let me point out something else. 5% of the people that watched live went back and watched on demand. That means maybe they had to step out, they missed something, or they wanted to share it with their peers, whatever. It is critical. I mean absolutely critical to not only archive your event once it's over, but to get it in the hands of everybody that either watched live or registered and did not watch live, but then to continue to promote the content. The content's got really long legs. Let me show you how long those legs are. So here is the average, the on-demand, the long tail of on-demand viewing. Kind of a weird statistic to look at here. So let me just explain what you're looking at in this chart. Day 0 that you see all the way on the left side, that 0 means that's the live day of your webinar. That is when most people watch their webinar, right? 60% are watching that webinar on the live day. But then what you see every day afterwards, or every week afterwards in this chart, is are people viewing on demand. Now, obviously, a majority of the on-demand viewers are happening shortly after the live webinar, because you've got a lot of people that, let's face it, our average conversion ratio is what, 35% for some of you, 40% for some of you. So a whole lot of people that wanted to see your webinar did not watch it. So you'll get a lot of viewers in that way, right? But after that, look at the long tail that continues. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I could have expanded this chart out by literally 6 or 7 months, 8 months, and you will see that long tail continue. That is because companies are continuing to promote those webinars on demand. How are they doing it? Well, you can use them in your nurtures. You can promote them individually via email marketing campaigns. A big thing we're seeing is the Netflix effect, where companies are building on-demand webinar portals or gateways on their website. Yeah, you could put it in your resource center with all the rest of your content on your website, but let's face it, these giant receptacles of content are becoming a little too much. So if you can build a little portal, a little cool little Netflix webinar gateway where people can come in and pick and choose any of the on-demand webinars that you have and watch when they want and watch however much of it that they want, you will get a lot of content consumption. A lot of content consumption. So I want to recommend that everybody have a strategy for that. It's really, really important. And then finally, the last thing we looked at is the on-demand viewing time. So the average viewing time for on-demand webinars goes down. However, it has been steadily rising. In 2015, it was about a half hour. In 2016, a little over that. 2017, it was 42 minutes. Now, in this year's report, it's 44 minutes. Why does the number go down, right? The average viewing time for live webinars is about 55 minutes. It goes down to 44 minutes. Well, it's because in an on-demand webinar, just like a YouTube video, you have a slider. You can advance it. You can skip around. You can move around. So people tend to watch a little bit less, but that's okay. That's okay. Look, you already got your 200, 300, 500, 1,000 people to view your live event. Now, everything else is gravy. So you've got a really significant opportunity to drive increased content consumption, increased lead generation. There's so much more you can do by having an on-demand strategy. So I really want to encourage all of you to think about what that looks like. Okay, we covered a lot of ground, I know, and I want to get to your questions. I just want to summarize a couple of key points. In the beginning, we talked about promoting your webinars. Give yourself a longer period of time to promote your events. Schedule your webinars for the middle of the week. The time, 11 o'clock is a good one. When you run your webinar, don't be afraid of the long-form webinar. Make sure that you're keeping your webinars as interactive as possible. Use the tools. Don't just do Q&A at the end. I know I'm just doing Q&A at the end, but don't do what I'm doing. And then try to leverage video where possible. And then finally, have an on-demand strategy. It can make a giant difference in your marketing. Okay, so with that, I'm going to bring Selma back in, and I'm really eager to get to your questions.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, we have wonderful questions. First one for you is from Elise, who wants to know, what is the number one factor that gets prospects to sign up for webinars?
Well, I think the number one factor is great content. When you're creating your promotional strategies, you need to Think about what the needs are of your customers, the prospects. What's the message that you're giving, and what is the benefit of them? We have a tendency to focus in our promotions about like our message, which we think is so important, but you really need to be thinking about the value that your prospect or that your viewer or audience member will get out of the webinar. If you focus on the ROI, what will they learn? What will they get out of it? And show them that this is something where they will actually learn something, not where you're just going to pitch them. I think it'll make all the difference in the world.
All right, fantastic. And we have Jared that's curious to know, after email, what's the best way to promote a webinar?
Great question. Well, I'll tell you, the other main ways in which people are promoting webinars are social, although we're getting better. We're not great at that because our social footprints aren't super dialed in. With social, my recommendations are just mix up the message a lot. Don't keep and see ways you could put the value proposition in the social. Also, promoting from your website can be really effective if you can get real estate on your homepage. That's huge. But my favorite little tip here is promote your webinars from other webinars. You've got a captive audience. It's a great opportunity for you to get people who are already engaged with you to sign up for future events. I love doing it that way.
All right, great, Mark. And Marilyn wants to know how many live webinars that are 60 minutes long do you recommend per year, per quarter? Do you recommend a webinar strategy that mixes up the formats, time length, or do you stay consistently with one?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. I spoke to this a little bit before. First of all, the number of webinars you do is predicated merely by the number of webinars that you can physically support. What I always tell people is, because I get this question a lot, our webinars are doing really great. We love it, and we want to do lots more, but we're not exactly sure how to expand our programs. There's only, we only have 4 or 6 hands, and there's a couple of things I always tell people. First of all, segment your database. If you've got one really great webinar, why not take that webinar and then repurpose it for specific key verticals or use cases where you change a little bit of the content. Maybe you change the examples, change a little bit of the context, and deliver it for specific audiences. Deliver both long-form and short-form content. Hour-long webinars are wonderful, but you can also build a library of on-demand webinars that maybe just talk about product features or maybe that are customer interviews. And then deliver webinars for every type of content that you have. Like I said, replace those bad demos with live webinars. A lot of companies are doing a weekly 20-minute live demo with a product manager, or maybe the demo is semi-live and then they roll over to live for the Q&A. You mix up the type of webinar, and it'll give you the ability to deliver many more webinars as a part of your strategy.
All right, Mark, I believe, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I do want to thank you again. It's always fantastic to work with you and get your insights. Of course, thank you so much to our audience for your time, your great participation. And I do want to remind you that you will be receiving an email notification when this webinar will be available on demand. So please look out for that. And I wish everyone a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.